She was mocked for sitting at the auction, until a rider paid her debt in silence. The gavel cracked like a gunshot against Martha Caldwell's heart. Her husband's prize stallion, Thunder, was led away by strangers who counted coins instead of memories. The October wind cut through her threadbare shawl as she sat rigid on the courthouse steps, watching 20 years of her life sold to the highest bidder. "Look at her, still sitting there like she owns the place," sneered Abigail Morrison from beneath her feathered hat. The banker's wife had always envied Martha's grace, but now she savored watching it crumble. Pride comes before the fall, they say. Martha's fingers found a thin gold band on her left hand. It was all she had left of Samuel, all that remained after the fever took him and the debts followed like vultures. The ring caught the pale sunlight, a tiny beacon of defiance against the gathering storm of her ruin. Auctioneer Hiram Polk wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool air. His voice had grown hoarse from calling bids on furniture, tools, and livestock that once made the Caldwell Ranch the pride of Cedar County. Now only one item remained on his list, the one that would break what little spirit this woman had left. "Ladies and gentlemen," Polk called out, his voice carrying across the dusty courthouse square, "we have one final item. A wedding band, 18-karat gold, belonged to the deceased Samuel Caldwell." He cleared his throat, unable to meet Martha's eyes. "Starting bid is $50 to cover the remaining debt." The crowd fell silent. Even the children stopped their games to stare. Martha felt their eyes like brands against her skin, hot with judgment and cruel satisfaction. She had been the wife of the most successful rancher in 3 counties, and now she was nothing more than entertainment for their bitter hearts. $50, Polk repeated, his hammer raised. "Do I hear 50? Martha's hand trembled as she twisted the ring. Samuel had saved for 6 months to buy it, working extra shifts at the lumber mill before they married. She remembered how his callous fingers had shaken when he slipped it onto her hand, promising her a life of plenty and protection. Those promises lay as dead as he did now. $40? Polk's voice cracked with desperation. He had known Samuel Caldwell, had shared whiskey with him on many evenings. This felt like grave robbing. The silence stretched like a taut rope. Martha closed her eyes and felt the weight of every debt, every unpaid bill, every sleepless night since Samuel's death. The ring would barely cover what she owed, but it was all she had, all she would ever have. $30? Polk tried again, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool breeze that carried the scent of approaching rain. Martha stood slowly, her knees protesting after hours of sitting on the cold stone steps. Her dark dress, once her finest, now hung loose on her diminished frame. She had not eaten properly in weeks, choosing instead to feed what little they had of Samuel during his final days. Now, even that sacrifice seemed meaningless. She began to pull the ring from her finger, each movement deliberate and final. The gold band had worn a groove in her skin over the years, marking her as surely as a brand marked cattle. Without it, she would be unmarked, unclaimed, unwanted. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for this final moment of her humiliation. They had come not just for bargains, but for the spectacle of watching Martha Caldwell fall from grace. She had always carried herself with quiet dignity, never gossiping or putting on airs, but somehow that had made her a target for their resentment. $25? Polk's voice was barely a whisper now. "Please, somebody bid $25. Martha's ring was halfway off her finger when she heard it, the slow, measured sound of spurs against stone. Someone was walking up the courthouse steps behind her, their boots ringing with each deliberate step. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see another face twisted with mockery or false sympathy. The footsteps stopped just behind her left shoulder. Martha could feel the presence of someone tall, could smell leather and trail dust and something else, something that reminded her of sage and distant mountains. Still, she did not turn. Hiram Polk's eyes widened as he looked past Martha to whoever stood behind her. His expression shifted from desperation to surprise, then to something that might have been relief. The crowd's murmur died to nothing, as if the very air had grown too thick to carry sound. The stranger's voice was low and rough, worn smooth by years of wind and weather. $50, he said, and the words fell into silence like stones into a still pond. Martha's hand froze on her ring, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She had not heard that voice in years, but she knew it as surely as she knew her own name. The years fell away like autumn leaves, carrying her back to a time when hope still lived in her chest, and the future stretched bright as summer sky. The $50 gold piece caught the afternoon light as it spun through the air. Hiram Polk caught it with trembling hands, his eyes wide as silver dollars. The crowd pressed forward, craning their necks to see the man who had just saved Martha Caldwell from her final humiliation. Martha turned slowly, her heart beating against her ribs like thunder before a storm. The man stood 3 steps below her, his face shadowed by the brim of a weathered hat. Dust clung to his long coat, and his boots bore the scars of 1,000 miles. She searched his features for something familiar, some echo of memory, but found only the hard lines that frontier living carved into every face. "Sold to the gentleman," Polk announced, his voice shaking with relief. "The debt is settled." The stranger touched the brim of his hat in Martha's direction, a gesture so brief it might have been imagined. Then he turned and walked away, his spurs singing a lonesome song against the courthouse stones. The crowd parted before him like wheat before wind, their faces painted with confusion and disappointment. "Wait," Martha called out, finding her voice at last. But the man did not stop, did not turn, did not acknowledge her words. He swung himself onto a bay horse that waited at the hitching post and rode out of town without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves settled slowly, leaving no trace of his presence except for the gold coin in Hiram Polk's palm. Abigail Morrison's mouth hung open like a barn door. "Who was that?" she demanded, as if someone owed her an explanation. Did anyone recognize him? The townspeople murmured among themselves, shaking their heads and shrugging shoulders. A stranger had ridden into their midst, performed an act of unexpected kindness, and vanished like smoke. It was the kind of thing that would fuel gossip for months, but provided no answers for Martha's burning questions. "Mrs. Caldwell," Polk said gently, approaching her with careful steps. "Your debt is paid in full. You're free to go home." Home. The word tasted bitter as alkali water. Home was a ranch that no longer belonged to her, a bed that would never again hold Samuel's warmth, a life that had been sold piece by piece to the highest bidder. She had nowhere to go, no family to take her in, no skills that would earn her bread in a town that had watched her fall with such eager eyes. Martha walked down Main Street in a daze. Her feet carried her past a general store where she had once shopped with purpose, past the church where she and Samuel had been married, past the saloon where men now whisper about the mysterious stranger who had paid her debt. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of old blood. She found herself at the edge of town, where a weathered sign proclaimed Caldwell Ranch, 3 miles. The road stretched before her like a scar across the prairie, leading to a place that was no longer hers. But where else could she go? The new owners would not take possession until morning, and she had no money for a room at the boarding house. The walk home took her past familiar landmarks that now felt like tombstones marking a dead life. The old oak where Samuel had carved their initials still stood, but the letters had grown faint with weather and time. The creek where they had picnicked during their courtship ran low and muddy, choked with fallen leaves. As she climbed the hill that overlooked her former ranch, Martha saw smoke rising from a chimney. Her steps quickened despite her exhaustion. Perhaps the cook, Elena Rodriguez, had stayed to prepare one final meal. Perhaps there was still some warmth left in the place she had called home for 20 years. But when she reached the ranch house, she found it empty. The smoke came from a small fire in the yard, where her few remaining possessions had been piled. Someone had built the fire to keep her warm through what would surely be a cold October night. A pot of coffee sat warming on a flat stone, and a plate of beans and hardtack waited on the porch steps. Martha searched the shadows around the buildings, looking for whoever had shown her this small kindness. The barn stood empty. The corrals held only memories of horses long since sold. Yet someone had been here, someone who knew she would need food and warmth on this night of all nights. She found a note tucked under the coffee pot, written in a careful hand on brown paper. A debt repaid requires no thanks. Use what time you have left here to decide what comes next. The words were signed with nothing more than the letter E, drawn with the precision of a man accustomed to writing his name on important documents. Martha stared at the letter until the firelight made the words dance before her eyes. Who was E? Why had he paid her debt? What did he know about debts and repayment that she did not? She sat on her own porch steps, eating beans that tasted like charity, and drinking coffee that warmed her body, if not her soul. Around her, the ranch settled into evening quiet, broken only by the distant howl of coyotes and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Tomorrow the new owners would come, and she would have to leave this place forever. But tonight, she was still Martha Caldwell, and this was still her home. The mysterious stranger had given her that much. One last night to say goodbye to the life she had built with Samuel. One last chance to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. She pulled her shawl tighter against the cooling air and watched the stars emerge above the mountains, each one a distant light in an ocean of darkness. The fire burned low as the night deepened, and Martha wondered if she would ever learn the identity of the man who had saved her from complete humiliation. Something about his voice, his bearing, the way he had moved suggested a history she could not quite grasp. But morning would bring its own demands, and she could not spend forever chasing shadows and half-remembered dreams. Martha spent 3 sleepless days asking questions that led nowhere. The stable master at Henderson's livery scratched his gray whiskers and shook his head. The postmaster claimed no knowledge of any man with the initial E. Even Father McKenna, who knew every soul within 50 miles, could offer nothing but prayers and sympathy. It was Elena Rodriguez who finally broke the silence. The former cook found Martha sweeping the steps of the abandoned schoolhouse where she had taken refuge, sleeping on a pallet behind the teacher's desk. Elena approached with careful steps, her weather hands clutching a basket of warm tortillas. "Senora Martha," Elena said in her careful English, "there is something you must know. The man who paid your debt, I have seen him before." Martha's broom stilled in her hands. "Where?" 20 years ago, maybe more. He came to your ranch with Senor Samuel. They argued terribly, voices like thunder in the night. After he left, Senor Samuel was never the same. He drank more, worked harder, spoke less of the old days. The tortillas grew cold as Elena told her story. The stranger's name was Ezra Thornfield, and he had been Samuel's partner in a silver claim-up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. They had struck a rich vein together. But when it came time to register the claim, Samuel had filed it under his name alone. Ezra had trusted his friend's word that they would split the profits equally, but Samuel had already made other plans. The silver from that claim, it paid for this ranch, for your wedding dress, for everything good in your life, Elena whispered, crossing herself. Senor Samuel, he told me before he died. The guilt, it ate at him like a sickness. Martha felt the ground shift beneath her feet like sand in a windstorm. Everything she had believed about her life, about Samuel's success, about the foundation of their happiness had been built on betrayal. The man who had saved her from humiliation was the same man her husband had cheated 20 years ago. She found Ezra Thornfield's cabin 3 days later, hidden in a box canyon north of town where the aspens turned gold with approaching winter. The place was modest but well kept, with a garden that spoke of careful tending and a corral that held 2 good horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of pine and coffee into the crisp morning air. Martha approached the front door with her heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. She had rehearsed her words during the long ride, but now they scattered like leaves before the wind. How did one apologize for 20 years of unknowing comfort built on another man's loss? Ezra opened the door before she could knock, as if he had been expecting her. Up close, she could see the years etched in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. He was still a handsome man, but there was a loneliness about him that sat heavy as winter shadows. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said simply, stepping aside to let her enter. "I wonder when you'd come." His cabin was clean and sparse, decorated with nothing more than necessary furniture and a few books on a wooden shelf. No photographs, no mementos, no signs of a life shared with others. Martha accepted his offer of coffee and sat at a small table, searching for words that might bridge the chasm of years and betrayal. "Why did you pay my debt?" she asked finally, the question that had tormented her through 3 sleepless nights. Ezra sat across from her, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he was trying to draw warmth from it. "Because I knew what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. Because watching you suffer wouldn't bring back what Samuel took from me." "I didn't know," Martha whispered, "about the silver claim, about what he did to you. I didn't know any of it until Elena told me. I know." Ezra's voice was gentle, without the bitterness she had expected. Samuel was a good man who made a bad choice. The guilt of it probably killed him as sure as any fever. Martha studied his weathered face, looking for signs of anger or resentment. Instead, she found something that surprised her, a deep weariness, as if he had grown tired of carrying the weight of old grievances. 20 years, she said. "You've lived alone up here for 20 years because of what he did." "Not because of what he did," Ezra corrected, "because of what I chose to do afterward. I could have fought him in court, could have demanded justice. Instead, I ran. I let pride and hurt drive me into these mountains, and I've been hiding here ever since." The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Martha understood now why he had paid her debt. Not from any sense of obligation, but from a recognition of shared loss. They were both victims of Samuel's betrayal, both left to carry burdens they had not chosen. "The silver," Martha said. "Is there any left?" Ezra laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Gone long ago. Samuel spent it all on that ranch, on making a life with you. At least it went to something worthwhile. I probably would have drunk it away or lost it at cards." Martha rose from her chair and walked to the small window that looked out over the canyon. Golden aspens trembled in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. She thought about Samuel, about the weight of guilt he had carried, about the man sitting behind her who had spent 2 decades in exile because of one moment of greed. "He loved you, you know," Ezra said quietly. "Samuel talked about you constantly in those early days. How smart you were, how beautiful, how you deserved better than a rough man like him. Maybe that's why he did what he did, to be worthy of you." Tears burned behind Martha's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She had cried enough for Samuel, for her lost life, for the cruelty of circumstances beyond her control. Now it was time to face the truth and decide what to do with it. When she turned back to face Ezra, she found him watching her with eyes that held depths of understanding she had not expected. Here was a man who knew what it meant to lose everything, who understood the particular ache of betrayal by someone you trusted. In his loneliness, she recognized her own. "What happens now?" Martha asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. 2 weeks passed like water through cupped hands before the riders came. Martha was hanging laundry on the line behind Ezra's cabin when she heard the thunder of hooves echoing off the canyon walls. She had been staying in his spare room, helping with cooking and mending while they both pretended the arrangement was temporary. Ezra emerged from the barn, his hand resting naturally on the grip of his coat. 3 men rode into the clearing, their faces grim as undertakers. Martha recognized the leader immediately. Benjamin Harwick, Samuel's former business partner, a man whose smile never reached his cold eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell," Harwick called out, touching his hat brim with mock courtesy. "Heard you might be hiding up here. We've come to discuss some unfinished business." Martha felt her blood turn to ice water. She had hoped that paying the auction debt would be the end of her troubles. But men like Harwick never stopped collecting until they had squeezed every drop of blood from a stone. "The debt was paid," Martha said, stepping closer to Ezra. "Hiram Polk can verify that." Harwick's laugh was cold as winter wind. "That debt, yes, but there's the matter of Samuel's personal loan to me. $500, signed and witnessed. I've been patient, considering your recent losses, but patience has its limits." Ezra's jaw tightened. "Let me see the paper." "And you are—" Harwick's eyes narrowed as he studied Ezra's weathered face and steady stance. "Ezra Thornfield. I'm representing Mrs. Caldwell's interests." The name hit Harwick like a physical blow. His composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something that might have been fear before the mask slipped back into place. "Thornfield, I heard you were dead." "Common mistake." Ezra's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had faced death and found it wanting. "About that loan document." Harwick produced a folded paper from his coat, but held it just out of reach. "Properly witnessed and notarized. $500, plus interest. Call it $700 total." Martha's knees nearly buckled. $700 might as well have been 7,000. She had nothing left to sell, no family to turn to, no way to earn such a sum. Harwick knew this, of course. He was counting on her desperation. "What do you want?" Martha asked, though she feared the answer. Harwick's smile returned, thin and predatory. "Nothing unreasonable. You sign over any claim to Samuel's personal effects that weren't part of the auction. Some jewelry, perhaps, items he might have hidden away. And maybe you could provide certain services to work off the debt." The implication in his words made Martha's skin crawl. She saw Ezra's hand move closer to his gun, saw the deadly stillness that settled over him like a shroud. The two men with Harwick shifted nervously in their saddles, sensing the change in the air. "There's another option," Ezra said quietly. "I'll pay the debt myself." "Generous of you," Harwick sneered, "but I'm afraid the terms have changed. $700 was my offer yesterday. Today it's $1,000. Tomorrow it might be $1,500. The price of my patience keeps going up." Martha felt the trap closing around her like the jaws of a steel bear trap. Harwick had planned this carefully, waiting until she was most vulnerable before making his move. He knew she had no legal recourse, no protection under the law. A widow's word meant nothing against a signed document. "I have a counterproposal," Ezra said, his voice deadly calm. "You ride out of this canyon now, and I don't put a bullet through your lying heart." Harwick's companions reached for their weapons, but stopped when they found themselves staring down the barrel of Ezra's Colt. None of them had seen him draw. The gun had appeared in his hand like magic, steady as stone and twice as final. "You're making a mistake, Thornfield," Harwick snarled. "This is legal business. I have the law on my side." "The law," Ezra repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "Funny thing about the law. It tends to favor whoever has the most money and the fewest scruples. But out here, in these mountains, there's an older law, the law that says a man protects what matters to him." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the standoff unfold. Part of her wanted to accept Ezra's protection, to let him fight her battles and shield her from men like Harwick. But another part, the part that had survived Samuel's death in the auction and the loss of everything she had known, rebelled against the idea of being saved again. "Wait," she said, stepping between the two men. "Mr. Harwick, I'd like to examine that loan document myself." Harwick hesitated, his eyes flicking between Martha and Ezra's unwavering gun. Finally, he handed over the paper with obvious reluctance. Martha unfolded it carefully, reading every word with the attention she had once given to her household accounts. The document looked authentic enough, but something nagged at her. The ink seemed fresh, the paper too white for something supposedly signed months ago. More importantly, the signature at the bottom was wrong. Samuel had always signed his name with a distinctive flourish, a habit from his school days that had never changed. This signature was close, but not perfect. "This is a forgery," Martha said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. Samuel never signed this paper. Hardwick's face went pale, then red with fury. "You're mistaken, woman. Grief has addled your thinking. I was married to that man for 20 years, Martha shot back. "I know his signature better than my own. This document is worthless." The canyon fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the aspens and the creak of leather as Hardwick's men shifted in their saddles. Martha felt power flowing through her veins for the first time since Samuel's death, the power that came from standing up to bullies and finding the strength to fight back. "You have 1 minute to get off my property," Ezra said, his gun never wavering. "After that, I start shooting, and I rarely miss what I aim at." Hardwick's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the desperate, greedy man beneath. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll be back with the sheriff, with proper legal authority." "You do that," Martha said calmly. "I'm sure Sheriff Morrison would be very interested in seeing this forged document. Fraud is still a hanging offense in this territory." The 3 men rode away in a cloud of dust and curses, but Martha knew Hardwick's threat was not empty. He would be back, and next time he would bring more than just hired guns. The law might be corrupt, but it was still the law, and men like Hardwick knew how to use it as a weapon. "We need to leave," Ezra said, holstering his gun. "Tonight, Hardwick won't wait long to make his next move." Martha nodded, understanding that this was a choice she had been running from since the day of the auction. She could stay and fight a battle she was almost certain to lose, or she could trust a man who had already saved her once and see where that trust might lead. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the canyon walls gold and crimson, Martha packed her few belongings and prepared to leave the only home she had known since losing everything. She was trading one uncertain future for another, but this time she was not facing it alone. The last light faded as they rode out the canyon, leaving behind a small cabin where 2 damaged souls had found unexpected understanding. Ahead lay the vast darkness of the frontier, full of dangers and possibilities in equal measure. Behind them, the echoes of their horses' hooves faded into silence, carrying away the ghosts of old betrayals and the promise of redemption earned through quiet acts of courage. In the end, justice had nothing to do with courts or laws or the weight of legal documents. It lived in the choice to protect what mattered, to stand against cruelty when standing was all you had left, and offer mercy to those who had been broken by the same cruel world that had broken you. Martha Caldwell rode into the darkness beside a man who understood the true cost of both revenge and forgiveness. And for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest like a flame refusing to die.